science will tell you that there are 4 components of consciousness: the 5 senses, the reasoning ability of the mind, the imagination and creative emotional states, and the memory complex. So the 5 senses enable your mind to receive information and then creatively imagine and then emotionally process. Your reason judges, discerns, your memory stores or rejects, and thereby conscious action then occurs. However, that's an incredibly complex theory. So if you remember that the mechanisms of consciousness are complex and intricate and difficult to understand, there's a reason for that. Whereas the workings of the conscience are much simpler, and there's a reason for that. One cannot work properly without the other, and in fact, may entirely collapse without the other. So the entire concept, logically, of the word conscience, as commonly used, in the moral sense, happens to do with what people say is the inherent ability of anyone to perceive what is right or wrong, good and bad, etc., etc. And in Oneness Teachings, it is taught to you that there is no good and bad, right and wrong, etc., etc. The danger of that teaching is that you begin to lose one particular emotional facet of conscience, of your conscience, and then you cannot be aware of your conscious. You can't be aware of consciousness. That particular technology and state of awareness is compassion. Without having a conscience, you have no sense of compassion. And if you have no sense of compassion, you cannot be fully conscious. Your whole system begins to break down. So that degree of integrity and honesty and authenticity of each human being monitors and determines the quality of your judgment and whether it stays judgment or becomes deep, ethical, spiritual discernment and wisdom from the God mind, not the human brain consciousness. Do you see the difference? I'm going to give you a new definition of the word conscience. To have a conscience means that you care and that you can act with integrous compassion. If you can't, your system, your systemic function of both the human mind and the God mind will not work. They will collapse inward. So the whole process of information, judgment, discernment, consciousness, awareness because of conscience should be understood as a complex, is continuous, it's integrated. It's a set of functions in all healthy human beings, and one cannot be without the other. And if any part of these functions is defective or ceases to exist, the whole system of awareness and being conscious will suffer. And again, it may even fully collapse. So this demonstrates the wholeness, the coherence, the continuity of the human mind structure. And it means that even though we can theoretically distinguish between functions for the purposes of research and understanding of consciousness, these functions, in fact, operate as a systemic whole with an absolute interdependence above conscience within consciousness. So let's talk about the free will of that, because when I try to propose this theory, many people in the New Age community shoot it down and they're like, don't tell me what to do. I am a sovereign being. I don't believe in right and wrong. I believe in what's good for me. Me. So let's talk about the lack of compassion and the emotional technology involved in that very dangerous oneness teaching. But let's start out by discussing how it integrates or doesn't with your concepts of free will. Free will. What that means is we can decide to act in accordance with or against our conscience at any given moment. We are sovereign. That's all that means. And everything. All is everything. So indeed, these are our only options within your known current concept of free will. And it is within this framework that freedom of choice can creatively exist and is very powerful. Having a conscience does not take away your free will. It makes it work better. So this means that decisions and actions that are in accordance with the dictums of the individual's conscience can lead to a spiritual evolution and a graceful refinement of conscience. Without conscience, you can't be in grace. So this is a result of inner peace of mind, this grace, and such is the effort of all truly spiritual beings. So that's one thing. And if one acts against one's own conscience, it can lead to what I call an involution and a feeling of having a troubled conscience, as you put it. And in such a state, the overall director and judge of the mind becomes less distinct and even kind of quiescent, and its voice can't be heard. And this is when you say you're cut off from your intuition, you can't hear your inner voice. That's because a lot of the teachings out there in many spiritual New Age communities and oneness communities are teaching you that there is no right and wrong. And when you begin to believe that, you don't have a conscience, which means you lack the technology of compassion, which means you stop seeing everything in innocence. And you start also beginning to perceive that all actions, good or bad, have no ramifications, which is against the law of physics. That's against the law of attraction. That's against the universal law of resonance. There's a slingshot action and reaction that you create based upon how you feel and whether or not you want to cover it up and pull it down within you. You begin to get kind of this, how can I say it? Is when you're not listening to your voice, it allows your lower instincts and the lower chakra systems to gain the upper hand. And then they act accordingly to put you into fight, flight, or freeze response. And then your system of awareness and your consciousness cannot operate. So in this condition, it's a process begins energetically, and it creates an inner irritation that I call it the spiritual itch. It's really weird. Don't worry, it's not contagious. And that does not allow a moment of peace to settle in. It causes a grand, painful distraction in your mind and in your body, which inevitably causes mental conditions such as ADHD, ADD, post-traumatic stress disorders, and deeply embedded states of shame, guilt, and anxieties. So paranoid schizophrenia is another example of that. So eventually, these anxieties and these phobias begin to manifest, and they're these prodromal symptoms of a harassed health state. That is because you are not active in your conscience. So it happens in contemporary societies. It happens in spiritual societies. It happens to everyone in our spiritual communities, whether you are a yogi or in other communities such as, say you're a journalist, a politician, a scientist, an attorney, a police officer, a judge. It happens to everyone. So this, how should we say it? These transcendental, extra mundane experiences of spiritual people can take place, but not without your conscience being intact and connected so that the full integral portions of your consciousness can be operative. Okay? So you can't have one without the other. Conscience is integral and interdependent with your consciousness. Be blessed. Have a great day.